The massive crystal dome of the Galactic Council stretched high above thousands of seats, each one filled with beings from across the known galaxy. The air buzzed with the soft hum of translation devices working in hundreds of different languages. Ambassador Kale of the Altarian Republic sat in his usual spot, his blue-scaled hands adjusting the small device on his collar that would let him understand every word spoken today. He had been coming to these monthly meetings for over 200 years. Usually they were boring, trade disputes, border agreements, complaints about space pirates. Nothing that would change the fate of entire worlds. But today felt different. There was tension in the air that made his skin crawl. The council chamber was a sight to behold. Representatives from every corner of the galaxy sat in their designated areas. The tall, graceful Centaurians with their silver skin and large black eyes. The rock-like Rigelians who barely moved during entire sessions. The insect-like beings from the outer rim who clicked and buzzed even when their translators were speaking. And dozens of other species, all gathered under the crystal dome that showed the stars above. At the center of it all sat the council speakers, ancient beings who had seen empires rise and fall. They rarely showed emotion, but today even they seemed uneasy. The morning session had been going smoothly. A few minor trade disputes were settled. Some new exploration zones were mapped out. Then Commander Vex of the Zephyrian Empire stood up. Kale knew Vex by reputation. The Zephyrians were warriors, conquerors who had taken over 17 different worlds in the past century. They were proud, arrogant, and deadly. Vex himself was a perfect example of his species, tall, covered in dark green scales, with sharp claws and teeth that could tear through metal. His red eyes scanned the chamber as he prepared to speak. Honored Council, Vex's voice boomed through every translator in the chamber. The sound was deep and threatening like distant thunder. The Zephyrian Empire makes a formal announcement today. We claim the primitive world called Earth, located in what these beings call the Sol System. The effect was immediate. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. The clicking of the insect beings fell silent. Even the ancient council speakers straightened in their chairs. Kale felt his blood turn to ice water in his veins. He had heard stories about that world, whispered tales passed down from the oldest explorers in the galaxy. Most species avoided that entire sector of space. There were warnings, ancient ones, about the world and its inhabitants. Warnings that most young species ignored, thinking them just old superstitions. Kale stood up quickly, his chair scraping against the crystal floor. Commander Vex, he called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen centuries of galactic politics. I must advise you to reconsider this action. That world, there are serious concerns about attempting to conquer it. Vex turned his red eyes toward Kale and laughed. The sound was harsh and cruel like metal scraping against stone. Concerns? About a species that still uses chemical rockets to barely reach their own moon? Our scouts have observed them, Ambassador. They fight each other with primitive bullets and explosives. They have no faster-than-light travel. They have never left their own star system. What possible threat could they pose to the might of the Zephyrian Empire? Around the chamber, other representatives began to shift nervously. The Centaurian delegate was whispering urgently to her aide, her large black eyes wide with what looked like fear. The Rigelian ambassador, who never moved quickly, was actually gathering his documents and preparing to leave. Several other species were making quiet communications with their home worlds. Commander, Kale pressed on, knowing he might be the only one willing to speak up. The issue is not their technology level. These humans, they live on what our ancestors called a death world. Their entire planet has been trying to kill them since they first developed intelligence. Ice ages that lasted thousands of years. Volcanic eruptions that blocked out their sun. Asteroid impacts that wiped out most life on their world multiple times. And through it all they survived. Vex waved a clawed hand dismissively. Ancient superstitions, Ambassador. Fear passed down by cowards who were too weak to claim valuable worlds for themselves. The Zephyrian military has conquered species far more advanced than these humans. We have weapons that can crack planets, shields that can stop any attack, ships that move faster than light itself. What can primitive beings with crude weapons do against such power? That is exactly the wrong question to ask, Kale said quietly, but his words carried clearly through his translator. The question is not what they can do with their current weapons. The question is what a species does when it has spent its entire existence learning to survive impossible odds. But Vex was not listening anymore. He had already decided, and nothing would change his mind. The Zephyrians had never lost a war, never faced serious resistance from any world they chose to conquer. In his mind, Earth would be just another easy victory. The vote will be called, announced one of the council speakers, an ancient being whose species was so old that no one remembered their original name. All in favor of allowing the Zephyrian Empire to proceed with their claim on the world designated as Earth. The vote was closer than usual, but it passed. Many species abstained, unwilling to go on record either way. As the session ended and representatives began filing out of the chamber, Kale noticed something that chilled him even more than the vote itself. The smart species, the ones who had survived for millions of years in a dangerous galaxy, were all making the same type of communications with their home worlds. They were pulling their trade ships out of the Sol sector, moving their exploration fleets to other areas. Quietly, carefully, they were getting as far away from Earth as possible. Commander Vex strode from the chamber with his head held high, confident in his decision. His scaled features showed nothing but arrogance and certainty of victory. He had no idea that in trying to conquer what he saw as a primitive world, he had just doomed his entire species. The humans were about to show the galaxy exactly what happened when you threatened a species that had learned to turn extinction into evolution. The Zephyrian reconnaissance ships floated like dark shadows at the very edge of the Sol system, their sleek hulls barely visible against the star-filled void. They had been there for 3 weeks now, their powerful sensors reaching across millions of miles to study the small blue world that would soon belong to the Empire. Intelligence Officer Nax stood in the center of the main analysis room, surrounded by screens showing data about Earth and its inhabitants. His scaled fingers moved quickly across the control panels as he gathered information that would help plan the invasion. Everything he saw made him more confident that this would be an easy victory. The room was filled with junior officers, all busy studying different aspects of human civilization. They monitored radio signals, analyzed military movements, and cataloged human technology. The mood was relaxed, almost cheerful. Several officers were already making jokes about how quickly the humans would surrender. "Sir," called out Lieutenant Czar from his station, "I have completed the weapons analysis. The humans do possess nuclear weapons, but their delivery systems are incredibly primitive. Most of their missiles use liquid fuel that takes hours to prepare for launch. Their bombers are slow atmospheric aircraft that could never reach our ships in orbit." Nax nodded with satisfaction. "What about their space capabilities?" "Almost non-existent, sir. They have a few small research stations in orbit around their planet. No weapons platforms. No defense satellites. Their largest spacecraft appear to be cargo vessels that can barely reach their own moon. They have never attempted to travel to other star systems." Another officer spoke up from across the room. "Sir, their naval forces are particularly amusing. They still use something called aircraft carriers, floating platforms that launch atmospheric fighters. Their most advanced warships are powered by primitive nuclear reactors and armed with simple explosive projectiles." Nax activated his communication device to report to Commander Vex, who was waiting with the main invasion fleet several light-years away. "Commander, our analysis confirms everything we expected. This species presents no significant military threat. Their technology is centuries behind ours. I estimate the entire planet will surrender within days of our arrival." Vex's voice came through the communicator, filled with satisfaction. "Excellent work, Nax. How long until we can begin the invasion?" "The fleet can move whenever you give the order, sir. There is no need for extensive preparation. This will be simpler than our conquest of the vegan colonies." But as the days passed and more data flowed in, some of the junior officers began noticing strange details that did not fit the pattern of a typical primitive species. Ensign Crix was the first to bring up these concerns. "Sir," Crix said hesitantly, approaching Nax's command station, "I have been analyzing human cultural data, and there are some unusual patterns." "Such as?" Nax asked, not looking up from his main display. "Well, sir, humans appear to have developed something they call martial arts. These are combat techniques that they have been refining for thousands of years. Some of these fighting methods are designed to kill opponents using only bare hands and feet." Nax finally looked up. "Primitive hand-to-hand combat? That is hardly concerning." "Yes, sir, but that is not all. Their entertainment media is filled with stories about warfare, survival, and what they call apocalyptic scenarios. They seem to enjoy imagining situations where their entire species is threatened with extinction, and then figuring out how to survive anyway." Another junior officer joined the conversation. "Sir, I have been studying their historical records. This species has survived multiple extinction-level events on their own planet. Massive volcanic eruptions, ice ages that lasted thousands of years, asteroid impacts that destroyed most life on their world. Each time they not only survived but came back stronger." Nax frowned slightly but dismissed the concern. Many species survive natural disasters. That does not make them dangerous to a spacefaring civilization. But the disturbing reports kept coming. Officer Vell discovered that humans had something called special forces, military units trained specifically for impossible missions behind enemy lines. Officer Tarn found records of human conflicts where entire cities were destroyed rather than surrendered to invaders. Officer Quinn uncovered evidence that humans had actually used nuclear weapons against their own species during wartime. The most troubling discovery came from senior analyst Dex, who had been studying human military doctrine and strategy. He approached Nax with a thick data pad filled with information that made no sense according to normal civilized warfare. "Sir, I need to report some concerning findings about human military thinking," Dex said, his voice uncertain. "What kind of findings?" "They have concepts that no civilized species would consider acceptable. Something they call total war, where every member of their society becomes part of the military effort. They have strategies called scorched earth tactics, where they destroy their own resources rather than let enemies use them. Most disturbing, they have a concept called acceptable losses." "What does that mean?" "It means they are willing to sacrifice huge numbers of their own people to achieve military objectives. In some of their historical conflicts, they lost millions of their own kind but continued fighting until they won." Nax stared at the data pad trying to understand what he was reading. "This cannot be correct. No intelligent species would willingly sacrifice so many of their own people." "The data is verified, sir. But there is more. They have something called guerrilla warfare, fighting techniques designed for smaller forces to defeat much larger armies. They have strategies for fighting in urban areas where every building becomes a fortress. They have plans for continuing resistance even after their main military forces are defeated." Around the analysis room, other officers were discovering similar disturbing information. The humans did not fight wars the way civilized species did. They did not have clear distinctions between soldiers and civilians. They did not follow standard rules of engagement. They seemed to view warfare not as a political tool, but as a matter of species survival. "Sir," Ensign Crick said quietly, "perhaps we should recommend additional preparation time for the invasion force?" Nax looked around at his officers, seeing doubt in their eyes for the first time since they had arrived in the Sol system. But he also knew that Commander Vex was expecting a quick and easy conquest. Reporting concerns about primitive humans would make him look foolish and cowardly. "Continue monitoring," he ordered finally. "These are just cultural curiosities. When our battle fleet arrives and demonstrates our superior technology, these humans will surrender like every other species we have conquered." But deep in the back of his mind, Nax could not shake the feeling that they were missing something important about these strange beings who lived on the blue world ahead of them. The darkness of space suddenly erupted in brilliant light as 300 Zephyrian warships dropped out of hyperspace in perfect battle formation. Their hulls gleamed like polished metal, each ship a masterpiece of alien engineering designed for one purpose: conquest. The smallest vessels were the size of human skyscrapers, while the largest could have swallowed entire cities. At the center of this deadly formation floated the flagship Dominion's Edge, a massive vessel that had never known defeat in 17 different star systems. On its bridge, Commander Vex stood with his clawed hands clasped behind his back, watching the small blue planet grow larger on the main viewing screen. Earth looked so peaceful from this distance. White clouds swirled over blue oceans and brown continents. It was hard to believe that this tiny world had caused such concern among the older species in the Galactic Council. Vex had conquered worlds 3 times larger than this one, worlds with advanced technology and powerful militaries. "This should be simple." "Sir," reported the navigation officer, "we have achieved optimal position above the planet. All ships report ready for invasion operations." "Excellent," Vex replied, his scaled face showing confidence. "Open communication channels to the planet below. All frequencies, radio, television, whatever primitive methods they use to communicate." The communications officer worked quickly at his station. Banks of equipment hummed to life, sending Vex words across every possible channel that the humans might be using. Within seconds, his voice was being broadcast to every corner of the planet below. "Attention, primitive inhabitants of the world you call Earth," Vex began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never been disobeyed. His words were automatically translated into hundreds of human languages by the ship's advanced systems. "I am Commander Vex of the Zephyrian Empire. Your planet is now claimed by the Empire. You will surrender immediately and accept your new status as servants of our civilization. Any resistance will result in the complete destruction of your species." Vex finished his announcement and waited. This was always his favorite part of a conquest. The moment when the primitive beings realized how hopeless their situation was? Usually it took only minutes for the desperate calls for mercy to begin. Sometimes the leaders of a world would try to negotiate, offering resources or cooperation in exchange for their lives. Occasionally, a species would go completely silent, paralyzed by fear. But the response from Earth was unlike anything Vex had ever experienced. The communications board exploded with incoming signals. Thousands upon thousands of transmissions flooded in from every continent, in dozens of different human languages. The ship's translation system struggled to keep up with the sheer volume of responses. "Sir," the communications officer said nervously, "we are receiving an unprecedented number of replies. The translation computers are having difficulty processing them all. Put the translated versions through the speakers," Vex ordered. "Let me hear what these humans have to say." What came through the bridge speakers made every Zephyrian officer take a step backward. Instead of pleas for mercy or offers of surrender, the humans were sending threats. Creative, detailed, violent threats about what they planned to do to the alien invaders. One transmission came from what the computer identified as North America. "Come down here and we'll show you what humans do to uninvited guests, you ugly lizards." Another signal originated from Europe. "We've been waiting for aliens to visit for decades. Too bad for you, we've spent that time figuring out how to kill you." But the transmission that made even Commander Vex pause came from the Korean peninsula. A female voice, clear and calm, spoke in perfect English. "My name is Lieutenant Yoon Ji-woo of the Republic of Korea Armed Forces. You have just made the biggest mistake in your species' history. Come and take our world if you can, you scaled bastards. We'll show you why humans are the only species crazy enough to strap bombs to our own bodies and call it a valid military tactic." The bridge fell silent except for the continuing stream of threats and insults coming through the speakers. Vex stared at the communication station in complete bewilderment. In 17 conquests, no species had ever responded to his surrender demand with mockery and threats. "Sir," his tactical officer said carefully, "perhaps we should demonstrate our superior firepower? A small show of force might bring them to their senses." Vex nodded slowly. "Yes. Target one of their orbital installations. Something small and unimportant. Just enough to show them what our weapons can do." The ship's massive main cannon rotated slightly, focusing on a small research station orbiting Earth. The weapon charged with a deep humming sound that vibrated through the ship's hull. A brilliant beam of energy lanced out across space, striking the human station and vaporizing it instantly in a flash of light. Vex expected immediate panic. Usually, a demonstration of Zephyrian firepower was enough to break the will of any resistance. He waited for the desperate calls for mercy, the frantic attempts at negotiation, the collapse of whatever primitive government these humans had. Instead, something happened that had never occurred in the history of Zephyrian conquest. The humans became angry. Not afraid, angry. Every military base on the planet went to full alert status. Fighter aircraft launched from carriers floating on Earth's oceans. Nuclear-powered submarines disappeared into the deep ocean. Most disturbing of all, the volume of human communications increased dramatically, and the ship's psychological analysis computers detected not fear in the human transmissions, but pure rage. One of the 3 survivors from the destroyed research station was picked up by a human rescue ship. Dr. Choi Han-sol, a scientist who had been conducting peaceful research, spoke calmly into his radio as he was pulled from his escape pod. "They killed civilians. Scientists. People who were just trying to learn about the universe." His voice was steady, cold as ice. "Show these aliens what we do to species that murder innocent people." Within hours, every nuclear submarine on Earth had moved into attack position. Military satellites were being rapidly converted into weapons platforms. Most terrifying of all, civilian space facilities across the planet had begun manufacturing devices that the Zephyrian sensors could not identify. Commander Vex watched the tactical displays showing Earth's military response with growing confusion and concern. "What are they doing?" he asked his officers. "Why are they not surrendering?" His sensor officers studied the readings carefully. "Sir, based on their movement patterns and energy signatures, I believe they are preparing to fight us." The bridge fell silent. In 17 conquests across the galaxy, this had never happened before. No primitive species had ever looked at the overwhelming might of the Zephyrian fleet and decided that the best response was to prepare for war. Commander Vex was about to learn why the older species had warned against attacking Earth, and why humans had survived everything their deadly planet had thrown at them. They were about to show the galaxy what happened when you threatened a species that had spent its entire existence learning to fight impossible odds, and win. The sun was just rising over the Korean peninsula when the first Zephyrian landing craft broke through Earth's atmosphere like falling stars. Commander Vex watched from his flagship as dozens of dropships descended toward major cities around the globe. Each craft carried 50 of his finest soldiers, armed with energy weapons and protected by shields that could stop any known weapon. This was how every Zephyrian conquest began. First, the landing craft would secure key positions. Then the orbital bombardment would destroy any resistance. Finally, the surviving population would surrender and accept their new rulers. It had worked perfectly 17 times before. The first dropship landed in a field outside Seoul, South Korea, at exactly 6 in the morning local time. The craft's heavy doors opened with a hiss of pressurizing air, and 50 Zephyrian soldiers marched out in perfect formation. They wore gleaming armor that could deflect energy beams, carried weapons that could melt through solid metal, and had personal shields that made them nearly invulnerable to primitive attacks. Captain Nam Hyunwoo lay hidden in tall grass 500 meters away, watching the aliens through the scope of his rifle. He had been waiting here with his Special Forces team for 3 hours, ever since the orbital sensors detected the incoming dropship. Around him, 20 of South Korea's best soldiers waited for his signal. "Remember the briefing," Nam whispered into his radio. "Their armor is designed to stop energy weapons. We use kinetic rounds, bullets, explosives, anything that hits them physically. Priority is to capture their technology if possible, but kill them all if necessary." The Zephyrian soldiers began advancing toward the city, confident that their superior technology would protect them from any resistance the primitive humans might attempt. Their energy shields glowed softly around their bodies, and their plasma rifles hummed with deadly power. They had walked exactly 200 meters when Nam's team opened fire. High-velocity bullets tore through the energy shields as if they did not exist. The shields had been designed to stop plasma bolts and energy beams, but they offered no protection against simple pieces of metal moving at 3 times the speed of sound. Zephyrian soldiers fell as human bullets punched through their armor, which had also been built to deflect energy weapons rather than kinetic projectiles. The aliens tried to return fire, but their plasma weapons were designed for long-range combat in space. The humans fought from concealed positions, appearing just long enough to shoot before disappearing again into the terrain they knew perfectly. Within 14 minutes, all 50 Zephyrian soldiers were dead. Sergeant Oh De-young, an army engineer who had been studying alien technology for weeks in preparation for this day, rushed to examine the fallen enemies. She grabbed a damaged plasma rifle and dragged it behind cover, ignoring the energy bolts that other landing craft were firing from orbit. "Captain," she called to Nam, "I need time to study this weapon." "You have 1 hour before we move to the next position," Nam replied, coordinating the withdrawal of his team. Oh De-young worked with the focused intensity of someone who knew that understanding this technology could save her entire species. She carefully took apart the alien weapon, studying its components and trying to understand how it functioned. The design was actually simpler than she had expected. The aliens had focused on making their weapons powerful rather than complex. "Sir," she reported after 45 minutes of intense study, "I understand how their plasma rifles work. They use magnetic fields to contain and direct superheated gas. It's actually quite simple. Our factories could build copies of these weapons within hours if we get them the right materials." Captain Nam nodded grimly. "Send the technical specifications to military command immediately. Then we move to intercept the next landing craft." Across the planet, similar scenes were playing out in dozens of locations. Human forces that had been preparing for this invasion for weeks were systematically destroying Zephyrian landing parties. The aliens had superior technology, but humans had superior tactics, better knowledge of the terrain, and most importantly, they were fighting for their home world. In every battle, humans managed to capture alien technology. Engineers and scientists worked frantically to understand and copy the advanced weapons. Within 6 hours of the first landing, human factories were beginning to produce crude but functional copies of Zephyrian plasma rifles. Colonel Lee Min-ho, coordinating the global defense effort from a bunker beneath Seoul, watched reports coming in from around the world. "The aliens are losing every ground engagement," he reported to the International Command Center. "Their technology is impressive, but they fight like they expect us to be afraid of them. They have no experience fighting an enemy that refuses to surrender." But the Zephyrian ground commander, watching his forces take casualties unlike anything in the Empire's military history, made a decision that would change everything. General Krone, commanding the ground invasion from his command ship, stared at the battle reports in disbelief. His soldiers were being slaughtered by primitives with crude kinetic weapons. "This is impossible," he growled to his staff. How are these humans defeating our technology? Sir, his aide replied nervously, they appear to be using tactics we have never encountered. They hide, attack and retreat before we can respond. They show no fear of our superior firepower. General Krone's scaled face twisted with rage. Then we will give them something to fear. Order orbital bombardment of the human cities. Target their civilian populations. When they see their young and weak being destroyed, they will surrender quickly enough. It was the worst mistake in Zephyrian military history. The first orbital bombardment struck a hospital in Tokyo, killing 3,000 civilians including hundreds of children. The second hit a school in London during class time. The third destroyed a refugee camp in Syria where people had gathered hoping to escape the fighting. The psychological effect on humanity was immediate and devastating, but not in the way General Krone expected. Instead of breaking human morale, the attacks on civilians removed the last restraints on human warfare. Dr. Baek Soo-jin, a biochemist at Seoul National University, received word that her hometown had been destroyed from orbit. She looked at her research team's scientists who specialized in chemical and biological weapons but had been restricted by international law and basic morality. All restrictions are now removed, she announced quietly to her team. They want to see what humans do when we stop playing by civilized rules. Show them. Within hours, human forces began deploying weapons that no civilized species would consider using. Chemical agents that turned the aliens' own armor against them. Biological weapons specifically designed to attack Zephyrian physiology. Kinetic weapons launched from improvised railguns that could punch through any armor. Most terrifying of all, the Zephyrians discovered that when their species was threatened, humans did not distinguish between soldiers and civilians. Children built improvised explosives. Elderly humans conducted intelligence operations. Scientists became weapons designers. The entire species had become a single military unit focused on one goal, the complete destruction of the invaders. Commander Vex, watching the casualty reports climb beyond anything in Zephyrian history, finally understood why the Galactic Council had tried to warn him about Earth. Humans were not just another primitive species to be conquered. They were a species that had learned to turn extinction into evolution, and they were about to teach the galaxy exactly what that meant. The great crystal dome of the Galactic Council chamber had never seen anything like this before. An emergency session called within hours, with representatives rushing in from across the galaxy. Some had traveled for days without sleep to be here. Others had abandoned important meetings on their home worlds. The air buzzed with panic and confusion as thousands of beings filled the chamber. Ambassador Kale of the Altarian Republic stood at the center podium, his blue-scaled hands trembling slightly as he prepared to deliver news that would change everything. Around him, the greatest minds in the galaxy waited in tense silence. The ancient council speakers leaned forward in their high chairs, their ageless faces showing concern for the first time in centuries. Fellow representatives, Kale began, his voice carrying clearly through every translator in the chamber, I have received confirmed reports from our deep space monitoring stations. The Zephyrian invasion fleet has been completely destroyed. The effect was immediate and explosive. Thousands of voices erupted at once in dozens of different languages. The clicking of insect beings rose to a frantic pitch. The melodic tones of the gas giant dwellers became harsh and discordant. Even the normally silent rock people began making grinding sounds of distress. All 300 vessels, Kale continued, raising his voice above the chaos, including their flagship and the entire command structure. There are no survivors. The Zephyrian Empire's entire military force has been wiped out. The Centaurian delegate, her large black eyes wide with shock, stood up so quickly that her chair fell backward. This is impossible, she declared, her silver skin pale with fear. The Zephyrians had the most advanced military in the galaxy. They had conquered 17 worlds without losing a single ship. How? Demanded the representative from Rigel, his rock-like features showing more emotion than anyone had ever seen from his species. How could primitive beings with no space fleet destroy 300 advanced warships? Kale activated the holographic display system in the center of the chamber. The familiar image of the Sol system appeared, but it looked nothing like the peaceful star system they had seen before. Where Earth's orbit should have been clean and empty, there was now a massive debris field stretching across millions of miles of space. Our long-range sensors monitored the final phase of the conflict, Kale explained, manipulating the hologram to show different views of the destruction. The humans did not simply defend their world. They turned their entire solar system into a weapon. The hologram zoomed in to show Earth itself, now surrounded by what appeared to be thousands of small craft and defensive platforms. Energy readings showed massive industrial activity across the planet's surface and in orbit around it. They adapted Zephyrian technology faster than our scientists thought possible, Kale continued. Within days of the first battles, humans were building copies of alien weapons. Within weeks, they were improving on the original designs. They fought with tactics that no civilized species would consider acceptable. The insect representative from the outer rim clicked frantically, and her translator converted the sounds into words. What kind of tactics? How did they defeat energy shields and advanced armor? They used kinetic weapons, simple projectiles fired at high speed. The Zephyrian shields were designed to stop energy beams, not solid objects. But that was just the beginning. When the Zephyrians targeted human civilians, the humans removed all restrictions on their warfare. Kale manipulated the hologram again, showing the final battle. The images were difficult to watch, human spacecraft moving at impossible speeds, ramming into Zephyrian vessels and suicide attacks. Debris fields where entire sections of the alien fleet had been destroyed by weapons that shouldn't have existed. They used chemical weapons, biological agents, and something they call nuclear ramming, loading their fastest ships with atomic weapons and flying them directly into enemy vessels, Kale said quietly. Most disturbing of all, they coordinated as a single species. Every human on their planet became part of their military effort. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. This was not how civilized warfare was conducted. Advanced species fought with rules, with limitations, with some concept of acceptable behavior. The humans had fought like wild animals protecting their young, with no rules, no limits, and no mercy. The debris field extends across their entire solar system, Kale continued. But our sensors show something even more concerning. The humans are not celebrating their victory and returning to peaceful activities. They are building. The hologram shifted to show the edge of the Sol system, where new energy signatures were appearing. Human vessels have been detected at the edge of their star system. They are equipped with hybrid technology, combinations of their own engineering and captured Zephyrian systems. They appear to be preparing for space exploration on a massive scale. The Rigelian ambassador's voice carried the sound of grinding stone. Are they planning to attack other worlds? Have we created a new threat to galactic peace? We do not know their intentions, Kale admitted. But we have received a transmission from them, directed specifically at the Galactic Council. Every being in the chamber tensed as Kale activated the communication system. The main display flickered, then showed the image of a human female in military uniform. Behind her, technicians worked with equipment that was clearly a mixture of human and alien technology. To the Galactic Council and all species within listening range, the human said, her voice calm and clear, I am Admiral Park Eun-ji, speaking for the United Earth Defense Force. Humanity extends an offer of peaceful contact and trade relations with all species willing to approach us with respect. Her expression grew harder, more dangerous. However, let this message be heard clearly across the galaxy. Earth is under human protection. Any species that threatens our world or our people will face the same fate as the Zephyrian Empire. She paused, letting her words sink in across the vast chamber. We are a young species, but we are not primitive. We have survived everything our world could throw at us, ice ages, volcanic winters, asteroid impacts, and each other. We have turned survival into science and warfare into art. The transmission ended with coordinates for diplomatic contact and a simple message that chilled every being in the chamber. We come in peace. We are prepared for war. As the hologram faded, Ambassador Kale looked around the chamber at thousands of representatives who now understood that the galaxy had changed forever. A new power had announced itself not through diplomacy or gradual contact, but through the complete destruction of those who had threatened them. The humans have arrived, Kale said quietly, and we must decide whether they will be our allies or our replacements. Across the galaxy, emergency diplomatic missions launched toward Earth from dozens of worlds. The age of humanity had begun.